Today, we're talking the real numbers behind making $100,000 a year as a chef, a hip and happening cruciferous vegetable story, a fascinating play-by-play of Dave Barron's Postulese reopening in Los Angeles, and more. This is the Repertoire Podcast. My name is Justin Khan. I'm here with Ray DeLucci for another Repertoire Report where we bring you breakdowns and news stories and happenings in the chef and restaurant and cooking professionally food industry space. Before we get into it, we need your help. We currently have, as of recording, 47 reviews on Spotify and just 74 on Apple Podcasts. Ray and I have set a goal to get those numbers to 100 each. And so you can literally see it in real time when you make the impact and leave that review, which number you're helping us with, and that is absolutely free to do. And if you end up deciding to do so, thank you. We really appreciate it. YouTube folks, like and subscribe. We want those numbers up too. How are you, Ray?
Doing well. Cruciferous. What a word to
Hey,
to
I
enter
gotta
the
like
podcast into.
I gotta give Brassicas some love, man, because you'll laugh when I kind of share my thoughts on you bringing that story in the year of our Lord 2025. I just think it's funny how cyclical some of this stuff ends up being. But before we get into that, the story that I brought first that I want to kind of dive into is this how to achieve $100,000 a year as a chef story. And maybe as an interesting place to start, how rare is it to make six figures, $100,000 a year as a chef, Ray? Like, what percentage of chefs do you think are making $100,000 per year, just out of curiosity?
And are we talking just like independent restaurant types or restaurant groups as well?
Yeah, so like executive chef level, the way that the data breaks it down is Bureau of Labor Statistics actually categorizes cooks in one bucket. So this is line cooks. You are a non-manager, basically, is how it categorizes it. So you are working in a food establishment, leisure and hospitality, and you are managing other people. How rare do you think it is? What percentage of chefs do you think are making $100,000 a year?
I did not look at this because I saw this question in our notes, so I didn't actually look. I'm going to say 15%.
Okay, interesting. I think I have both lower numbers in my brain because I was in restaurants before the big inflation adjustment that happened during the pandemic. But I also have three sources of information to share that certainly surprised me. So the first comes from the actual core piece. We're going to link it in the show notes. It comes from Chef's Pencil that claims to lay out geographically where chefs are making $100,000 a year. And to just get it out of the way, they share that it's about 10% of chefs are earning that. And so you weren't
Wow,
that far
that's
off
very
with
close.
15% being the number. And so, yeah, kudos to you. And if you are picking up some caveating in how I'm sharing this, I am. Because unfortunately, I wasn't able to find the official Bureau of Labor Statistics data that the author of this piece was sharing, unfortunately. They just, in their sources, they just link to the BLS website, and then they make tables and maps and share it in the article. But when they say those are sources, it's actually just like from a data aggregating tool. And so they're making their own numbers. And then later on in the piece, they're like, we had to do some external research for this outside of the BLS data. And so if someone else that is better at reading government websites than me is able to get to the bottom of this, I combed through this for extensive amounts of time to try to get to the numbers. But because, and the reason behind that is because the only information I was able to find was from 2024. And so they're claiming that there's like new data for 2025 where that's the actual number. But that's not that far off from the 2024 data because the top 10% number in 2024 was $96,000 a year. So like as we're kind of like getting up in the salary numbers, we have officially cracked 10% of chefs are making over $100,000 a year, which is kind of like a monumental kind of like threshold to cross. Okay, so why am I covering this? Zooming out. I'm stoked about more people coming into the industry, thriving in the industry. And a prevailing narrative, correct me if I'm wrong, Ray, is if you enter this industry, expect to not make a lot of money. And that's certainly true in lower throngs of the industry when you're in roles that aren't quite, like managing. You don't have to have a certain level of skills built up yet. And without getting into personal finance stuff, $100,000 is not a small amount of money. I know that when I was graduating culinary school, and I looked this up back in 2012, it was less than 1% of chefs making $100,000 a year. And so the source that I pulled that from is called hcareers.com. Sharing that, quote, only private chefs and extremely high-profile culinary professionals rarely crossed the $100,000 threshold in 2012, generally estimated to be well under 1% of the total occupation. So I don't know if that was where it was for you, Ray, when you graduated, but like making $100,000 a year as a chef was like super rare. That was like, unicorn job opportunity. So statistically now, if you're in culinary school and you're graduating with a class of 100 kids, given enough time and professional development and good decision making, 10 of those 100 kids are going to be making 6 figures a year as they become professionals in the industry, which is honestly really exciting. And I think this can be a huge trend flip for people who are motivated to achieve that kind of a career goal. And so my second source, I mentioned there was 3. This Chef's Pencil piece is one, where we have some maybe questionable data, but I still think it tracks. The second source is a real-time search that I did just this morning on culinary agents. And so what I did is I searched the word chef, no geographical filtering, no sort of like other caveats to that, just the word chef. And so the entire US is up for grabs. And what came out as a result is 198 jobs on culinary agents for just the word chef. We didn't do any sort of other searches. But then I filtered that by jobs that are $100,000 plus in compensation. And it is 106 out of 198. So over half of those are offering compensation packages that are over $100,000. And so I also realize, caveat, that culinary agents is only a small sliver of job opportunities out there. But come on, like, that's awesome. And I even shared in the newsletter a few months back, I was actually emailing with Nick Kokonis from Millennia, ex-Millennia. And he was consulting for a project that he was trying to recruit a chef for that. And that was a 6 figures for less than 1 year of work with that contract, just to build out the systems for a concept as the executive chef. So now, this does not guarantee that just because you're finding these opportunities on a job marketplace website, that you can just waltz into any of these positions and command that kind of salary. A lot of this is contingent on experience, but I'm trying to prove a point that the opportunities themselves exist in a way that they did not 10, 15 years ago. And so this is a case of, if you're the type of person that's saying, I am so talented, I have all these skills, and I'm really motivated, but the most I can make is $75,000 a year, like, those days are gone, in my opinion. And lastly, I talked about the Nick Kokonis anecdote. I have a couple of more anecdotes that I just see on too regular of a basis now to not call this like a new norm, so to speak. And so on my Instagram stories, the people I follow, the people I'm talking with, the people who I decide that I'm trying to get information from, at least 2 times a week, I'm seeing people like Kat Odell out of New York. She's the wife of Mike Begal from Sip and Guzzle, and she does a lot of stuff in the fine dining space, consulting on projects. She's posting job opportunities, trying to place chefs and recruit chefs at different opportunities. Friends of mine who have private chef agencies or chef owners that I follow, they're posting like, look at this position. I need to fill it. It's $120,000. It's $150,000. And sure, a lot of those come with big life implications. You need to relocate. You need to be in a position to take that opportunity. Maybe you need to leave the job that you're at. But it's just a lot less rare than what the numbers in my brain are calibrated to. And so I'm personally just pumped to see this. Coaching clients I've worked with have achieved these kinds of numbers. I just think it has huge implications from a lifestyle perspective for chefs when your money problems are effectively like money solves money problems. And I think it's awesome to see the countervailing example from an evidence perspective of people saying, well, chefs who don't have personal finances in order start to struggle with XYZ areas of their lives. Higher salaries, especially in leadership positions, makes it so that we can have more sturdy leaders in some of these organizations. And I also think when the businesses that are paying these salaries plan to pay these numbers, it encourages a lot of the positive behavior in organizations that we talk about on this show. And so one last quick point before I get your thoughts, Ray, is the piece from Chef's Pencil talks about the fact that a lot of these numbers don't include owners of businesses. And so I think that that's also a really fascinating, you can make more than this, but at what cost? Do you know what I mean? When you are the owner and all those responsibilities fall on your shoulders, and a lot of owners actually take a hit to their salary when they start their own businesses, and they're not making as much as you would in a salaried position. And so I think a lot of the prevailing pressure, especially as you start to get more experience in the industry, is people start to ask you like, do you want your own thing? What are you going to do after this? When are you going to become an owner of something? And I don't actually think it's to be frowned upon to say, I have $120,000 a year salary, and it's actually something that I'm super stoked with. I love my team. I love the work that I'm doing. And from a financial perspective, from a professional development perspective, I worked hard to achieve this position. And there's no shame in like being in that position, because the piece says, quote, it's also important to note that many of the best paid chefs are business owners. They run or co-own restaurants, giving them the opportunity to not just earn a salary, but also share in the profits. For those with strong entrepreneurial spirit, this can dramatically increase earning potential beyond what's reflected on payroll data. And so really quick, to summarize the numbers from the piece, if you aren't interested in reading it yourself in full, the piece claims 11,000 chefs in the US earn more than $100,000 per year. And so that's just like, they break it down by individual municipalities and cities. The highest number of chefs earning $100,000 or more are found in those major metro areas known for their high wages, including New York, which is like 1,600, LA, which is just under 1,000, Boston, San Francisco, and Miami, all around like 800 to 700. And then Kahului Wailuku, chefs in the top 10% earn at least $134,000 a year, while in urban Honolulu, that threshold is $124,000 a year. And then the last number that is just an interesting thing that they found, who knows if this position is actually going to get filled. In their research, they found an executive chef position at a Marriott in New York. The salary band, the high end of the salary band, was $232,000 a year for the salary. And so those are just like gargantuan numbers that are just unheard of to me. But again, it is not something that I ever had the opportunity to kind of like encounter because my time in restaurants was before some of these numbers were more the norm. Ray, I don't know if you have thoughts on this or if the salary data maybe surprised you or if it was like, oh, this is just the world we live in now.
I think it surprised me the percentage of chefs getting this. I'm weird and I look at LinkedIn jobs on a weekly basis and not even for my like own benefit, but just to like see what's going on in the industry. And when you asked me what the percentage was for $100,000, I wasn't saying 10% because I didn't think there was like, it wasn't based out of jobs that were lower. My gut is that if you would have asked me what are the positions that are like $90,000 or more, that number would jump to like 40 to 50%.
Yes.
Because there's a regional map that I'll throw up on the screen right now that is going to be showing you different different pay differences between the states, and you'll see that I can't calculate it, but it's around 80 to 90, mid 90,000. So for me, it's obviously really good. It's showing that there is a demand in restaurants for leaders, and I've shared this on Line Cook Thoughts. You've obviously shared this with repertoire and everything you do, and I think that gap is only going to grow. And I covered a story last week on this New York Times piece, how all of these people that have gone to school to code to get these software jobs are finding themselves working into industries like restaurants. And so I think that we're going to have an influx. My gut is telling me we're going to have an influx of major restaurants moving forward, of like people going in at entry level, and that you're going to have a difference where people in the restaurant industry are going to get elevated to leadership simply because they know the ins and outs of a restaurant, and restaurant owners or operators or businesses are actually wanting to pay people more because of this. So I think it's a good thing. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for restaurant workers to work their way up into these roles. And I'd be interested to see where this goes, where this is at in another 5 years, because I think a lot of people in the food world and every industry, it's like AI is going to displace us. And I actually have a theory that the food industry in different ways, specifically restaurants, is going to be one of the last things to be displaced over like these white collared positions. And so therefore I foresee this flux of people coming in, and I foresee opportunities for those that have experience in restaurants and management or some other like experience like within the world of the food industry, having opportunities to move up quicker because of this influx of new talent that doesn't have any cooking background. So those are kind of my thoughts on it. But yeah, it's great to see, and I'm excited for the people.
Well, there was a quote that I attribute to Grant Achatz, because that's the person who told me this told me it through the lens of advice he received from Grant. And so Grant basically told him, when you're at this crossroads of what, career decision you want to make, it can come through the lens of you're doing it for the resume. So the name, the recognition, the association with a certain company or brand, the experience. So this is something I've never done before. I'm getting cool skills at this job. I'm filling in gaps in my repertoire. And then thirdly is just the financial compensation, the salary. And I think that comes into play at a later stage of your career. Most people in the early days are not trying to seek out job opportunities because of the compensation. And so you're almost making me think about doing maybe a piece on this where it's like the trajectory is actually bounce around a lot to get a lot of experience in a lot of different places. And then you crack that threshold of being able to make $109,000 a year at a place, and then you settle. And then you stay. And then because you're getting well taken care of, because, again, you're at an organization where you resonate with what they're doing, because, you have benefits and because you have a little bit of like decreased work hours, because you have more infrastructure around you, it actually turns into something that's more sustainable in a way that makes people want to stick around and actually have a North Star they can point to set goals for themselves in the industry. That, again, it doesn't almost demonize, oh, well, you haven't started your own business yet, or like label that as a failure. And I just think it's awesome. Like the ability to be able to achieve this, I think, is actually genuinely, I'm just as bullish as you are in the sense of like AI and some of this emerging tech, robotics, automation. It's going to be really hard to do the restaurant thing. I'm not saying it will never happen, but it's a lot further out than I think you and I can agree that it's going to come from. And so I think that all of this is just really encouraging, and to see it in the numbers played out in this way is encouraging. I do think that the other side of this is $100,000 doesn't go as far as it used to, and I certainly think that there's some argument for that. But I also think that if you can manage to see this many opportunities, you kind of have your pick of the litter if you're a chef who is able to tick some of these boxes. And so that's an interesting story. I'd be curious. You can actually comment to us on Spotify if this is interesting, or if you're on YouTube, you can leave us a comment if this is an opportunity you've been able to nail for yourself. If there's funny implications that come with something like this, I'd be kind of curious to hear from you folks. But yeah, Ray, what's your story?
One quick point too
Sure.
I think you'd be surprised as if, like, I work in food manufacturing and food development. I've noticed a huge increase in specialized food manufacturing roles, like a flavor scientist or a technologist. Like, we're talking 200 grand a year.
Nuts.
Like, it's insane. So just a thought for those out there that
Well,
are more
just
specialized
pause.
in the food world.
Can you pull back the curtain on that, and like, are they hiring chefs from like who have restaurant experience into roles like that, or is it like you have to have some sort of other qualifications in order to get a position like that?
It's a mix of both. Food technologists, like working for a chocolate company, like I think of Riches in Buffalo, and I don't know off the top of my head their pay. Like, you would need experience or a degree in that. But there's a lot of like tertiary, like R&D chef roles
Right.
or food developer roles that you can often get in and get above a six-figure pay grade. So I've seen a lot of times people from restaurants go into like a R&D chef role or a food role like that and be able to make a very livable wage. But then from there you kind of build your skills up from that. But then there's like the extra, which I don't qualify for, is like the meat scientist or the chocolate science, like like those people, and like those positions are just insane. So for anyone listening, I guess this message is for the younger crowd, or the crowd that may be looking to go to higher education for food, and you're worried more so about income. I would highly recommend looking into food science, because those roles are very, very in demand right now.
And just really quick, it is rare, right? So like 90% of
Mhm.
people are not making, that's the other way to interpret this data, is 90% of people are not making $100,000 a year. And I would certainly agree with some of your points, Ray, of like the distribution probably also now falls 80,000 and plus is probably a larger chunk of the distribution now than it was several years ago.
Which is still great. I mean,
Yes.
several years ago, this was like 60K.
It just doesn't align with, again, this prevailing narrative. And I think that is something that I have coaching calls with people, Ray, that like, my parents don't want me to be a chef because like I am so passionate about this and I want to enter this industry, but they're telling me that I have no opportunities to make money. This is not going to pan out financially for me. This is an irresponsible decision from a career perspective. And I think you can point them to this story, to some of the resources we're sharing, and just say like, it's just not true, right? Like, I have goals to want to be able to achieve XYZ things. And it is not that thing that I shared from that other piece, which is like, it is a less than 1% of people. If that was the outcome, then yeah, your parents are right. But like, looking at the current landscape now, it's just not the case. And it's something I'm stoked on, because I think it's going to result in more people entering the industry.
Let me share this. So this is a senior, and this is more if we're going to talk about the specialized role. So this is more so if you have the qualifications for this role are a bachelor's degree in culinary nutrition, or culinary science, which a good portion of people have. And then 8+ years of culinary development, working in food companies, restaurants, or large food service operations, restaurant chains, large food service operations, which you could tie that together. Like, that's someone probably, that's maybe 8 to 10 years outside of restaurants, have gone. It's like a food group or whatever. has a bachelor's degree in food business or whatnot. So senior research chef, Hunt Valley, Maryland, from McCormick. It's a pay range from $86,000 to $151,000 a year.
Nuts.
It's a mid-senior level, and so that's not even the highest person on that team. And McCormick's always hiring because they're so large. But again, just like there is a lot out there. So
And it allows you to plot a career path in a way that gets you past, because like you and I were in this space, right? Right, we graduate, and all we're worried about is like making sure we're employed after college. And once you do that, it's like I feel like the planning for whatever reason just stops for people. And you know, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but I think seeing some of this from this is the North Star, this is the carrot that you can point yourself at, might allow you to navigate things a little bit differently, as opposed to I'm just going to do, I call this like arbitrary tenure at restaurants. So like, I'm going to stay here for 2 years. And it's like, for what? You know what I mean? And I'm not saying you need to leave your job because you've been there for 3 months, but it is something where you can be a lot more intentional in your career. That's ultimately the takeaway that I hope folks are drawing from this story. So yeah.
all right, go on to the next one. So this one is coming from BBC, titled "Eat What You Want, Pay What You Can" at restaurants across Mexico City. And I actually thought this was very interesting. We talked, Justin, and I've talked a lot. I think this came up in the EMP episode. It's come up in my content for years in Line Cook Thoughts. This idea of Michelin-starred food not being accessible to a swath, I'd say 95% of the general public, due to its price. So there's this restaurant, Michelin-starred Masala y Maíz, hopes to spread the trend across Mexico and around the world. Chefs Norman Listman and Sakib Kaval, they're the owners and chefs at this Mexico City restaurant, and they won their first Michelin star, and they were highlighted in BBC due to their very groundbreaking mode of payment for diners. So, quote, "Our team was calling us and we weren't answering the phone." And this is them on receiving the Michelin star. And then the nerdiest of our managers, the most serious one, calls, and I was like, he never calls unless something is wrong. Turns out that we were live on the stage at the Michelin Awards. So they're known for their Eat What You Want, Pay What You Can initiative. And it is an initiative that started out of them wanting to support their community. So basically what happens is several times a year, restaurant goers are offered a menu of the restaurant's signature Mexican, African, and Indian fusion dishes, alongside an envelope in which to leave whatever payment they have available or deem acceptable. There is no bill and no reservations. Guests must line up for a first-come, first-serve experience, and there is one requirement. Diners must write how much of what they've left is intended for the staff rather than the restaurant itself. So how much they're actually paying the staff. So the practice is intended to ensure that everyone in the city, regardless of their economic status, can enjoy these dishes. They talk about how Mexico City is dealing a lot with gentrification, over tourism. And so actually their actions have inspired 20 additional Mexico City eateries to participate in August 27th, which just happened, on a Eat What You Want, Pay What You Can day. The event is to be the first of what Caval hopes will become a tradition around the world. Quote, "We've had people from Chile reach out, from Colombia, from other parts of Mexico, and from Peru that want to join, and I don't see why it's going to be like Pay What You Can International." So basically, this idea that, and it's a beautiful restaurant. I mean, there's pictures in this BBC article of the interior. I've seen some of their food. It's quite awesome to see, everything going on. But I think what was interesting for me is I think I'm very bullish on this idea that as we have gaps in classism and what people can afford to eat, the next wave of hospitality is allowing more people into the door. And what this does is it gives people in your community a chance to eat the food that they can experience while allowing upper class people, like wealthier individuals in your community, to pick up the tab per se. And while this isn't their main business model, this isn't like they do this every day, having these opportunities, they say in the article, like they'll have guests come in that are, more well off, and they'll pay 3 to 4 times more what the check average was, just because obviously it's for the community. It's a sense of pride. It's a sense of wanting to support the staff in the restaurant. So I found this very interesting because in a world in restaurants where margins are so thin, to take the risk to do something like this and see it pay off, not only in an accolade for their food, but also in recognition from their community and obviously the international restaurant community, I think it's like really A, thought-provoking, but B, it just shows like a level of leadership that I think we need more of in restaurants, which is there's a class of people or there's a group of people that cannot afford our food. Let's be open to them and let them try it. They shouldn't not be able to try it, especially if we're cooking in their community. So, your thoughts?
So I love the story. Chef Sakib and I are mutuals on Instagram, so we are, we're not. I wouldn't call us friends, but we follow each other. We message each other sometimes, and it's really cool to see both the experimentation side and then the vulnerability side, and the way that he engages with. I think he has another organization called People's Kitchen Collective as well that he is like a part of and supports and stuff like that. And so I think the initial place where my brain went was, what are some other examples of this? It's not just one price for the experience. And I think we've seen this with things like dynamic pricing on reservations, where a Saturday night 8 o'clock reservation is going to be more expensive than a Tuesday 5 o'clock reservation, for example. And what we've seen with some of these like more hype driven, you almost kind of like hierarchically arrange, the experiences in a certain way. Those fall victim to some of these like scalping style behaviors where people will go and, have bots snag the 8 p.m. Saturday night reservations and then just sell them at a markup to other people who, are able to pay quote unquote more. And so that kind of dispelled that myth in my mind, or that belief that I had in my mind of like, well, maybe there should be at least a baseline price or like that's where I came into seeing the story from, where I was like, well, how is this going to break down? And certainly, and I think you kind of touched on this, this is not a realistic thing that everybody is either being suggested to do or that it's going to work for every single type of business. I think the way that they've decided to do it, the order of operations for this is also interesting. You launch the concept, you get the accolades and awards where the trust is there, and there's almost like the demand has been generated. And now the way that you're going to charge and price things is a little bit more based out of human nature, maybe not the way to say it, but I guess where I sometimes push back, or the place where I have a hesitation here is people almost taking advantage of this. Like that's the thing that I want to make sure that businesses that are listening to this avoid. And it might be something where it's not every night that you do this. And, this might be if you're maybe wanting to adopt some of this strategy into your own business, maybe that's a takeaway that you could have, where it is, we want to open things. I think we've seen other examples of restaurants where they open it for students, or I think certain restaurants do it for, it's like a kid's night at the restaurant where, as long as you're under the age of, I think it's like 16 or something like that, you come in with your parents and you can have this meal and it's a different price because, again, it is this example of wanting to open the doors up wider for a larger swath of people to kind of come in. My brain went with it's almost like a social experiment at the table. I see some of this play out. I think maybe might make guests uncomfortable. I don't necessarily know, like, how does that experience, I've certainly been at places where we have that culture already with tipping, right? So like there's this expectation that you need to give a little bit more beyond what the receipt price says. And there's a societal expectation of percent that we're going to add up and on top of. I just don't know from an uncomfortability perspective, are you actually like maybe detracting from the hospitality experience? I don't know. Like I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here because it is so new and I just kind of want to see where this lands, but fascinating story. I'm curious to kind of see how it develops and if this becomes something that they can either maintain long term. I know that like there was a couple people at MAD in Copenhagen in May who are also from Mexico City talking about these fascinating ways that they're thinking about farming and taking care of purveyors and setting up areas in the city that are, kind of like dedicated to some of these newer businesses that I just don't think is happening in other cities. And so Mexico City is just this fascinating testing ground for some of these new ideas.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting to see. And I think one thing I really want to clarify, because when I read this article or when I saw the headline, I was like, oh, this restaurant like has this model. Does only happen several times a year.
Got it.
That is a good clarification, because when you read it, you're like, oh, this is like, how do they like, ever budget?
Yeah. Well, and that's where my head went, because I had a friend go to this restaurant a couple weeks ago, and I was messaging with Sakib to try to help get a reservation table for my friend. And it was this situation where I don't think that I feel like he would have messaged me if that was the experience, because he's also very nerdy about restaurants and food and all these sorts of things. And so good clarification just in there. Anything else on that point?
Nope, that's it. You're up.
Okay. So let's say the bear is a little too TV for you and you want something rooted in a reasonable level of reality. Well, I have good news. The LA Times did a breakdown of Dave Barron's postulae and the 24 days leading up to the opening of the new concept, quote unquote, of the restaurant and all of the changes that come with this new identity for the business. And so it says, quote, how does a fancy, in quotes, LA restaurant reopen as casual in just 2 weeks? A play-by-play. And so Jen Harris is the author, and I have a couple quotes that I kind of want to share just architecturally how this piece is laid out. Is it's effectively like 24 days out, and then the journalist is kind of sitting there and documenting conversations. What is the team doing? How is Dave reacting? And then they go all the way up until, I think it's like 2 days before the opening, or the opening night. And so a couple of quotes that kind of stood out. Quote, 24 days before the opening. Dave Barron is balancing a baby in one arm and a laptop in the other. His toddler is asking for cereal, end quote. And so that is just like, again, a very non-TV-ified view. And I know that there's like a, Nat has a baby in the bear and, there's family stuff that's happening in the bear at all times. But I think it is this cool peek behind the curtain of what a chef owner kind of goes through in some of these opening. It is like the most dramatized, not the most, but it is one of the most dramatized moments in a restaurant's history, is like leading up to opening. And so it's just really interesting to see this all cataloged in this way. I have a couple other quotes I want to read for you. Quote, when he reviewed the restaurant in late 2019, critic Bill Addison called Postuli a return to grand French dining in LA, end quote. Then the pandemic hit and the restaurant underwent a series of changes, shifting to takeout, then in-person dining again. Dialogue closed, which for those that don't know, side tangent from me, was Dave Barron's like fine dining counter style concept, also in LA. And again, the article shares that it also closed. Back to the quote. Postuli started offering more casual bistro fare and an expanded bar menu. More recently, there was a pre-fee menu. But somehow, despite adjustments, the restaurant couldn't quite shake its original quote-unquote grand identity. And so you have this juxtaposition, like it's at odds, where Dave also has like this incredible background of Next and Alinea, and he's in LA and also almost has established himself as his own person in LA, but he doesn't have a fine dining quote unquote place anymore. And so Postuli is in this weird kind of place in nebulousness wise. And for those that don't know, Dave has also opened another concept, which I want to talk about. Quote, in December, Barron opened Celine, a $295 per person tasting menu restaurant down the street, further solidifying himself as a fine dining chef. Though the restaurant recently introduced a limited 8-course, $165 tasting menu, Barron is determined to bring an air of fun to Postuli. And so it's really interesting where Dialogue opened first as the fine dining place. Think the French Laundry, and then Postuli opens as the Bouchon, the casual bistro place. And then Dialogue goes away. And so now we're like, okay, well, what is Postuli? And again, you had to navigate the pandemic and all these sorts of economic factors. And now Dave is like, okay, let's do another fine dining place. And so now all the fine dining stuff they used to do at Duck Press, tableside at Postuli. And now we're sitting there like, okay, well, Postuli maybe doesn't need to be this fine dining, quote unquote. For transparency's sake, I have also eaten at Postuli. This was before the pandemic, sometime around 2019, I think, is on a trip to LA. A friend of mine and I went and ate at Postuli. And so a couple of other quotes. Quote, for me, so this is now talking, what's cool about this piece is they actually catalog real conversations that are happening between the sous chef, the chef de cuisine, and Chef Barron, and how they're looking at a dish and constructing it. And what is important that I want to bring to our coverage of this is tying it into things like the 11 Madison Park story and some of the other macro trends that we're noticing in the industry. So this is a conversation that's happening between team members. Quote, for me, there are two large buckets to cost control. It's food and labor. Say you have this item like a tomato and it's on the cheaper side, but it takes 3 different people over the course of a week to do something with it to produce the final product. Then it's a much more expensive item on the menu than the food cost is reflecting. Our stocks and sauces take 3 to 4 days to make, end quote. And so that's exactly what I was talking about in the 11 Madison Park story. It's vegan. It's just vegetables. How expensive are these ingredients? And it's not the full story. And so that is like evidence point number 1 here in this piece. That is like different restaurant completely across the country on the other coast. but it is exactly what we're talking about in some of the coverage that we're doing on the 3 Michelin star side when 11 Madison Park decides to say that this is not financially exactly making the most sense for us. Going back into another quote, they're really playing around with sizes at this new iteration of Postuli. And I think in a bistro setting, when you're thinking about pre-fee menus, when we're also layering on some of these other trends of people don't, and I'm painting with a broad brush here, the big, heavy, laden with calories meal is almost like messing with their sleep score, or it's messing up the amount of protein that they need to have during the day. All these things that consumers and guests are more mindful of now is something that is being taken into account with a restaurant that's opening with this new style of concept. And so I have 2 examples. One is with a small serving of French onion soup that they're doing. And then another one is these mini cocktails that they're serving as part of the bar program. So, quote, it's literally a French onion soup, but super small. He digs a spoon into the soup. And then now this is talking about the developmental side of this dish. Already it looks like the bread absorbed all the liquid. Should I put in more fat? Butter cubes? Traditionally it's veal stock. Do you care that they are vegetarian? And so then they're calling this a French onion souplette at the new menu at Postuli. And then one of the team members says, for LA, it's probably better that it's vegetarian. And so now we're seeing all these other things, kind of like layering on top of it. We want smaller portion sizes, and we want this French onion soup not to be made with veal stock, but we want it to be made in some sort of vegetarian capacity, which is really interesting. And then the last quote that I have is, I have 2. So one, it actually breaks down on one of the opening nights, on one of the opening days, what the actual numbers are. And you could see how it breaks down for the stations on how food actually came out of the kitchen. So it says, quote, in total, the kitchen will prepare 28 orders of roast chicken, 40 French onion souplettes, 30 orders of cordon bleu chicken wings, 20 cheeseburgers, 30 plates of halibut crudo made by breaking down a 10-pound fish, and 2 rockfish for the evening. And then it literally says, Baron has decided to promote Joyce to chef de cuisine. Jack really stepped up, and the goal for me is to play editor, he says. And so you're literally seeing the team shifting in real time as this journalist is covering some of this stuff, which is really cool. And then secondly, we're also seeing something that I covered in my season 3 big mega video breakdown of the bear, which maybe we'll link in the show notes if people miss that, because that had a bit of a wonky upload schedule. But in season 3, there's this example of a chef saying, I want to basically stop cooking in this concept. I want to be the person who, in the way that Dave Barron is talking about here, the goal is for me to play editor, he says. And so you're putting your team in positions to actually execute on the operations on a day-to-day basis, and you are focused on something else now in your career. And I think that's the elevation that I'm talking about, from cook to chef to entrepreneur, that I talk about in my content. And the last quote, just on the cocktail piece, miniature martinis, the restaurant calls martinis, and snackeries are listed for $14, which I think is, you can call it shrinkflation, which I think is an interesting way to kind of approach it. But I think it also is much more in line with how guest preferences are going forward, which is, I don't want to have 3 to 4 drinks when I'm out. I want to maybe taste a couple of different things, and maybe I want to start the meal with something, but I don't want that much. People who are working probably have noticed people sharing cocktails, people doing, like 1 glass of wine, but both people are sipping from the glass. There's just an interesting shift in alcohol consumption going down. And instead of saying, okay, well, let's go more towards non-alcoholic options for people, let's still serve alcohol, but maybe meet people where they're at and say, let's just serve a little bit less. And then I think you're seeing some of these prices. It's not a $23 cocktail anymore. It's a $14 cocktail, which again, in the numbers that my brain is thinking about, those are pre-pandemic regular cocktail numbers. But I think it is much more in line with people just shifting and changing and adapting to the current state of things, and both financially what is needed and then also what the market is asking for. And so definitely, if you're into restaurant openings, and again, seeing the bear play out on screen isn't doing it for you, I think it's a very fascinating read. And I just loved the coverage of this for someone who's nerdy about, again, how restaurants actually operate. And how accurate it is, I don't necessarily know. People, if you actually work at Postuli and it was maybe different during these couple days because you had a journalist sitting there with a pen and paper, you can maybe let us know. But I just thought it was at least reasonably accurate enough for me to want to share this. Your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. Not much too thought, not too many thoughts. Thank you for breaking it down. I did read this before we started. I thought it was interesting. You covered all the major points. I think for the writing, it's really like it's if you can read it on a laptop, I think that's the best. It's really well laid out, and it is really just that the vision or the pathway of the restaurant opening. Um, I think it's more so of a go read this because I think it is if you're at all interested in restaurants or restaurant lore or kind of the planning of a restaurant, then I think it's really cool to see. But yeah, I thought it was awesome. I think it does speak to this idea of like going away from fine dining for some chefs has got to be the move. But yeah, I would rather like just go read this because I think it's an excellent not only portrayal of the restaurant going from fine dining to more of a not casual like but more of a welcoming offering, but it also just shows like the dichotomy of the thought that goes into these decisions and then actually how fast paced things can move in restaurant operations. So that was my big takeaway.
Really quick, this just came up as you were saying that. Why, like, is there a world? And I don't think Dave Barron was getting massive pushback from guests saying, "How dare you change the concept of past chili?" There wasn't this crazy level of outrage. But what came up as I was thinking was, why wouldn't a concept like 11 Madison Park post something this vulnerable in the context of sharing the news that we're deciding to not go vegan anymore? Like these over PRified New York Times giving us the article talking about, like the thing that just gets memed out of oblivion when you're sharing this on as an Instagram post. And it's just like, this is the decision we've decided to make of the future of 11 Madison Park. Like, what if you actually just had a journalist come in and just lay out some of the actual conversations that are happening behind the scenes here? And that would actually land a lot better with
Than
people
saying we're trying to be more inclusive to diners.
Yes.
For all those diners that cannot eat plants.
Yeah, so like nobody is going to be mad at Postuli for changing the concept when you're seeing how much work goes into this opening. You're seeing how thoughtful they are in some of these changes. You're seeing some of the real numbers of like, this is the number of orders we're having on one of our opening nights. This is what the chef's going through in his personal life.
Yep.
All of that vulnerability and transparency actually, I think, is going to help Dave Barron and Postuli and his whole restaurant group, because now it's like, oh, interesting. I didn't know that, they had a sister restaurant that was fine dining. And because you have written such a compelling piece that gets people to read it all the way through, people actually want to engage with your brand a little bit more, rather than if you're going to try to be this perfect PRified 11 Madison Park example that we're covering and people, you open the door to getting dunked on, as opposed to this, which I think is just much more compelling and builds actual trust with you as the chef owner.
An Easter egg for next week on my solo podcast, there was some reporting on how misleading the Beyond Meat reporting has been.
Uh-huh.
And how there's some prevailing narratives on this Beyond Meat situation. I'm excited to cover it next week. All right, so there is a show coming out that I'm actually very interested in. So this is published on Fine Dining Lovers by San Pellegrino, everyone's favorite carbonated water or sparkling water. I don't know. Maybe carbonated was actually a diss, and I apologize. San Pellegrino, sponsor us. Netflix puts the Culinary Institute of America in the spotlight with Next Gen Chef. So this is coming out on Netflix on September 17th. A new 8-part competition series follows 21 rising chefs under 30 as they face a gauntlet of challenges inside the CIA, judged by some of the biggest names in food and wine. Quote, Netflix is betting on the future of fine dining. Premiering September 17th, Next Gen Chef drops viewers inside the Culinary Institute of America, where 21 young chefs, all under the age of 30, compete through a rigorous set of challenges designed to crown the next breakout culinary talent. Guiding the competition is host Olivia Culpo, restaurateur and entrepreneur, with resident judges Carlton McCoy, master sommelier, and Kelsey Bernard Clark, chef, author, and Top Chef alum. Some other big names behind the scenes. The production itself brings heavyweight backing LeBron James and Maverick Carter, executive producing through Fullwell Entertainment, alongside Top Chef veterans Dan Cutforth and Jane Lipsitz of Alfred Street Industries. Dr. Tim Ryan, who was the former president of the CIA, also serves as an executive producer, tying the institution directly to the show. Some things that are interesting. So before I get your thoughts, just a quick note. So a guest judge lineup like no other, and they share that the series has some great judges. They list Thomas Keller, Daniel Boulud, and Grant Achatz, which you would probably expect to see in something like this. Christina Tosi, and then Kwame Onawachi as well. And then they'll be joined by Francis Lamb, Kat Cora, Paul Carmichael, Susan Feniger, Dale Talladay, Harold Dietler, Emma Bankston, and others across the season. Very interested to see this. I think this is going to be a big win for the CIA in many regards. I think that I think that maybe that this idea that culinary schools are failing, this is something like you'd be surprised at how much a Netflix show and hype could do for a show like this. So there is a if you go on Instagram, so Kelsey Bernard Clark at Kelsey Bernard Clark, she has 102,000 followers. Seems like she's wrote a cookbook. She's in the food media space, but she's kind of shared this. And if you go on the pictures, like, and if you've ever gone to CIA, like they're lined up outside of the Farquharson Hall. They're in Farquharson Hall's main banquet room. I think that's where like the chop style like chefs are going. So if you've ever went to CIA, there's going to be a lot of Easter eggs. But something I did find interesting in this, and actually quite sad, and I don't know how much she will be represented, but Anne Burrell is actually featured in the last slide of the show.
Wow.
Obviously, with her untimely passing, the sad situation around that, I don't know if this is her last appearance on TV, but it is obviously like, sad to see that. So just a lot of like interest for me, not mainly because of that, but of just this competition with the CIA, all these high profile chefs, what this will do for the CIA, how they portray CIA. And I think my biggest thing is this idea that they're betting on fine dining to be the future. And I almost wonder if that's the wrong bet for a school like CIA. And obviously this is for Netflix. And we will be having a guest coming on soon that can speak to this more maybe. But all that to say, I'm just interested to see how this portrays the CIA. The last thing I'll say, if you go into the Instagram comments of the person I just mentioned, there are actually some CIA college students who said this actually made our life hell. This is actually crazy for the students. And she responds to some of the comments saying apologies, we were everywhere. There's a little bit of some backlash from the student community on this. And I've seen some comments where like they took over the egg and you couldn't speak in the egg while they were shooting. And for you, if you don't know, the egg is like the commissary kitchen for students to go eat at or the community hall. So some backlash as well. But overall, I think it's going to be a good thing for the CIA. I think, for the reasons mentioned, it's also super sad to see Anne Burrell. Obviously happy to see her. She was a really huge alum, but sad to see her in this show. But beyond that, Justin, your thoughts on the CIA having the next gen chef competition come in September 17th?
You stole the thing I was going to cover, which was going into the comments and seeing the fact that just specifically like people feel undermined because you pay for full tuition basically. And if you don't have access to certain areas of the campus, or if your classes get cut short, or if you don't have the ability to be a normal student in the way that everybody else was able to, you feel slighted, which I kind of empathize with, to be honest. And
I think there was a comment, and I don't know if this is true, but I think there was a comment where someone was like, so Moss the Baker, this is the show that was recorded at the CIA in Poughkeepsie. I'd like to mention how detrimental this show was to the students at the time. Our campus was severely affected for multiple months without any restitution for students. And then there were some other people that were like happy with it. And then I think I saw a comment, I can't find it now, where someone was like, literally our bake shop was canceled for shooting.
Yeah.
So it's like, there is that whole thing.
Yeah, it's crazy. But I think to not mirror it back, but just like this even cements further the story on Johnson & Wales that we covered a couple weeks ago, where Johnson & Wales is like laying off staff and needing to cut certain specialties from their school. And CIA is like leapfrogging over them and having this heavy hitter cast of characters on a Netflix show. Like it is just so stark, the difference between levels of success that we're seeing in both of these businesses. And it's like a power law thing where all of the, attention, all of the resources, all of the benefit is going towards CIA as opposed to anywhere else. And I think that is just, we have to give a little bit of a tip of the hat there to, I think the president changed at CIA recently, and some of these decisions.
Well, he changed a while ago.
Yes.
I mean, this had to be, this was like, it was like an 8-month ago change, I believe, at this point. So this was recorded a while ago.
And I think also this kind of plays off of another kind of trend we're seeing, which is people documenting their journey in culinary school. The idea of going to a school just for cooking for the vast majority of quote unquote normies out there in the world is just incomprehensible. Like their college experience was totally different than what it is like to go to a school like CIA, just dedicated to learning about this craft and about this profession, and about the way that you spend your time at CIA is just so weird and foreign and different. I think it's just like why hasn't this happened sooner? Like there have been like mini documentaries and pieces of content that CIA has put out, but I sometimes reflect on this myself, and I have been not exactly deciding that I'm going to change all my content stuff, but what I'm trying to say is I focus so much on tactics and strategies and ways to like actually improve when you're in the industry. But I forget sometimes that if you really back up and you ask somebody, what's the thing that got you into the industry? It is a great meal somewhere. It is watching Ratatouille. It is maybe watching a show like this. And I think the CIA realizes some of that, where they're saying, can we put out this piece of content that is maybe not about exactly what the curriculum is at CIA, but it just genuinely inspires this level of motivation and excitement or in somebody that then, from a business perspective, actually results in more students for them. I think that's just and we don't know the behind the scenes what the deal was with Netflix and how much did the CIA get paid, quote unquote, to produce this, because from Netflix's perspective, they didn't have to build out kitchen sets, right? Like, yes, you had to take, well, yeah, you had to take stuff away from students, which I think is maybe another debate that we're now talking about because of the comments.
Well, it's funny because it looks like, they have the alumni receptions outside of FARC, and those literally look like those tables. It's like they have everything they need for this. I think what's interesting too is the CIA, with their master's programs, their president, I think he had a Google background. What I'm going to find interesting is the tone of the show, because if you know anything about Tim Ryan, he's like Master Chef, XYZ, has all this like traditional culinary arts tradition baked into like how he is, and he's producing this. So I almost wonder if this is like a focus on like maybe the what the CIA was representing in a sense, and like it still represents it somewhat, but like you and I both know that's not the direction the CIA is going in. So it'll be interesting to see the tone it leaves.
Totally. Anything
maybe
else
we'll break it down, maybe not as in depth as the bear, but I would love to have some banter on it if you get the chance to watch it. I know I'll be watching it just to merely show my girlfriend where I went to college. So
100%. Anything else on that one?
No, September 17th on Netflix. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. And if you were there when they were filming, comment on the YouTube show, comment below on the Spotify. I would love to hear how the time was there.
I have two quick hits, and then I'll turn it over to you for any stories you have left. But the first one was just like this surprising story on Reverie in DC closing. I don't know if you were aware of this happening.
No.
I've never been. It's Johnny Spero's place, I'm almost positive. Yep. And they had Bar Spero, which also closed. And I think that there's just this unfortunate situation of restaurants closing that, again, was Georgetown's only Michelin-starred restaurant. And they for all intents and purposes, the food looked great. The concept looks like it's pretty buttoned up. And they actually suffered a fire, and then they resurfaced in 2024 with a dramatic new look. And they're unfortunately serving their final course on Sunday, October 4th. And so that was just an interesting and unfortunate. They have Reverie 2.0's revised look took a dramatic turn after the fire, swapping slick white and blue subway tiles for a completely recalibrated palette full of pitch black finishes and a fancier white tablecloth approach with half as many seats. There's only 36 seats. And so that was just an unfortunate occurrence. Like, it just sucks to see something like this happening. In July, Spero pressed pause on its seafood-centric $255 per person dinner menu in lieu of a vegetable-heavy tasting format featuring summer fruits, celeriac, tempura maitake, and a more affordable price tag of $190. And so that's another, again, unfortunate story of that closure happening. And then another piece that, again, if you're into some of these like behind the scenes, how operations are actually playing out, and again, grain of salt caveat that some of this stuff gets played up or played off for journalists, but Business Insider did a piece on a Michelin-starred restaurant navigating economic pressures and how they're thinking about inflation and all those sorts of things. The restaurant is called
on my bucket list of places to go eat.
Indienne in Chicago is, I'm almost positive how you pronounce that. And so Sujan Sarkar is the head chef of Indienne, the first Michelin-starred Indian restaurant in Chicago. And so Sarkar told Business Insider he focuses on consistency and cost control amidst economic uncertainties. There was one quote that I just wanted to share, and then again, we're going to link the article in the show notes if you want to read on this further, if this kind of stokes your fancy. The piece asked, what advice would you give to emerging chefs or restaurateurs trying to build something ambitious in a time when margins may be tighter than ever? And his answer was, quote, I've waited almost 21 years to open Indienne. I could have opened before. I opened restaurants in so many different countries and all over America, but you have to be sure about what you're doing. It's not only about you when you open a restaurant. There are a lot of people who are going to trust you. If you fail, they fail as well. You may be good at cooking, but that's only 30% of any restaurant. You have to learn so many other things, your people management skills, your accounting skills, your interpersonal skills, your PR, everything comes into play. And so that's why we call this a repertoire podcast. That's why we put out these lessons and other individual things, because it is like when you make that fundamental switch to, okay, I'm going to learn the cooking side for sure. It's important, but there's more to it than that. It makes it so that you can open concepts like this and find success even when, people might tell you that the odds are stacked against you. Number one. Number two is the anecdote that I made on the speed at which restaurants are both finding their footing and getting these accolades, which is not even close to how some of this stuff happened in the past. And so we're seeing this exactly played out from a math perspective. He's saying 21 years leading up to this opening. And that is exactly just another evidence point and example of you're not going to rush to open the place and then learn everything, quote unquote, on the job at the restaurant that you're opening. You're going to instead be patient and build your skills. And then when it is finally time to open, you have everything ready to go. And again, because so much is resting on your shoulders, he lays that out really beautifully, saying people trust you when they come and work at your restaurant. And they're going to try to, again, have this be a piece in their career. And you don't have it all figured out yet. I'm not saying you have to be 100% before opening stuff. But I think that there is a kind of like minimum threshold that you should consider at least hitting before diving headfirst into it and opening your own place. And this is just another example of that. Again, there's other examples that countervail this, but I just think it's cool to see somebody being vulnerable and talking about this stuff.
Awesome.
That's all I got.
Quick two stories for me. We'll end on Cabbage. We'll start with Food Institute, attention economy. Wild brand collabs create millions of impressions. Basically the TLDR on this is that they give these examples of Mountain Dew pairing with the Trolley sour gummies, and so basically there's a Mountain Dew bottle with Trolley, and then there's a Trolley worms, the gummy worms with Mountain Dew flavors. So Miller Lite flavored chips, Mountain Dew flavored gummy worms, Guinness flavored ice cream. It seems product collaborations are being taken to a new level. And what marketing experts say could be a win-win for all involved. Quote, digital platforms have made it more feasible, especially because of the drip ecosystem it creates, says Riley Newman, founder of Motif Brands. A viewer may engage with the brand in one context through an ad, then see another touchpoint potentially exposed through the lens of the collaborating brand. On average, it takes 10 to 13 of these drips to influence a purchase decision, so the cross-pollination between brands on a scale via social media makes sense. Since the collaborations are weird or even seem gross, people are more likely to engage with or share or be pushed to try them. And so for me, I think the biggest thing to take away for restaurants is that if you are a restaurant brand, or not even a restaurant, just like a local food brand, maybe you're a bakery, a coffee shop, a brewer. I see this all the time. Go Brewing here in Illinois. They're a non-alc beer shop or beverage shop that I go to a lot. They have an amazing Oktoberfest, and they do brand collabs all the time. If you're a small food business and you have a brand, you have brand accolades that can be used, and you have another business that you think you could go together with, collaboration's key. People are looking for these collabs. They're looking for their favorite brands to work together. And so to be able to do this on a small scale, I always like to funnel out what larger companies are doing to restaurants and food businesses, because I feel like they as restaurants don't do that enough. So just something to check out. Go to Food Institute. It's a great article. The last story, as you said before, cruciferous. The London's sexiest produce star is a cabbage. Was in the New York Times. One of my favorite, I've never eaten there. Fallow, though, is the restaurant in central London. They're one of my favorite YouTube shows. So go check them out, or YouTube channels. They do amazing cooking content. But it's all about this ingredient called the Hispy cabbage. According to the New York Times quote, it is sweet, cheap, and able to withstand an enormous amount of heat. It has been available for decades, but in recent years has taken British restaurants by storm. I actually did some background research, and the chefs from Fallow actually have like a YouTube video called "Why Our Cabbage Costs So Much," and it's all about the Hispy cabbage. So just this idea of like, you know, the idea of a vegetable piece of produce like the Hispy cabbage that is kind of having a renaissance in London or British cooking, um, and how it's always been available. It's like what do we have or what can you use that seems like not great, and like how do you elevate it? And so this idea of a cabbage being like the trendiest, sexiest new thing in like London cooking, it's just again a reminder that if we if we can utilize things that aren't, this goes back to the foraging piece, that maybe necessarily aren't like, you know, picked out in the wilderness. They had a stat in there where the Cisco said that over there that the increase in purchasing of Hispy cabbage has gone up like 2.5% in recent months because of the trend. So it's just like something that was available at Cisco, some random cabbage varietal, and all of a sudden we can use it. So that's just my takeaway on the story. Your thoughts before we end this podcast?
I maybe have too many thoughts on the cabbage thing. I worked in Scandinavia for 3 years, and that was certainly something that like it was called spiskål for in Norwegian. So it was like pointy cabbage or like spike cabbage is the kål is like cabbage or like a head of a cruciferous vegetable type of situation. And so I have tons of experience working with this stuff. I think it's delicious. The three things, like if I was really to kind of without having read the piece, Ray, full transparency, I approach, or like if I had to analyze why it gets used and why it's so popular, I bucket it into three categories. One is just the obvious cost of it, right? Like cabbage is relatively inexpensive for what you get from a food volume perspective on the plate, which is not what you will sometimes experience, especially on the vegetarian side with something like mushrooms, right? Like if you're going to put an entire plate of mushrooms, the food cost in that is like insane. Secondly is texture. And so I think that like when you're looking at something that is, okay, we have another vegetable that we could probably do this with, something like a tomato, it's like relatively unitextural. Cabbage, when you cook it especially, you can have like the outer part of the leaf get like really tender, and then you have this really sturdy, center stem section. And it just holds up really well. Like texturally from a variety perspective, you can actually eat a full plate of cabbage, and it eats interestingly is the other place that where I think like it's so obvious why this is actually, and it doesn't exactly do the same thing as a, I don't know, like insert like head of lettuce or endive or something like that is like endive oxidizes. Cabbage does not, at least not in the same speed at which other vegetables do. And then the third one is like flavor. I'm not even going to say neutrality, but it's like the way that cabbage from a flavor perspective plays well with others. Because cabbage, if you actually eat it, it's like it has moisture, it has like a pepperiness to it, and especially when you do something like grilling it, it tastes so good when it's smoked. The little charred pieces, the tender pieces on the inside with the stem, and you can pair it with things I think like bagna cauda and chorizo are some of the examples that the piece lays out. And so from that perspective, it's not like, again, an endive, which is like you don't want to actually eat a full plate of bitter endive because it is like so overwhelming on the palate. Cabbage, in contrast, is something that you can actually build a dish around. And then from a volume perspective, you can get great food cost on it, especially if you're willing to, like, I think we talked about this in other shows where the protein is almost like the seasoning on the dish. And so you have something like chorizo kind of like tucked in the leaves of the cabbage. And then from a food cost perspective, similar to what we talked about with the postule example, you're still serving the thing, like they're mini cocktails. You're still serving alcohol. It's just a little bit less. You're still serving protein. It's just on something like cabbage. And again, this was 2015, so literally 10 years ago where I was putting this on tasting menus. And so to see it also rise in popularity again, I just think is so interesting for a completely different reason. We were doing it because, again, it was something we get in mass from our purveyors. So I guess it was maybe similar reasons, but this is genuinely because there's economic reasons why people can't afford other things. We were doing it just because it was interesting, because it was like, hey, we can grill this thing and it's a vegetable and we can, spread creme fraiche on it and put crispy shallots and chives on it. And it's really delicious because we serve it with, I don't know, an oyster emulsion or something. But yeah, just I'm a big fan of cabbage. I could talk on this for a whole nother podcast episode. But those are the interesting reasons why it totally makes sense to me why this is happening.
You're the Escoffier of cruciferous vegetables.
I'll take it. Anything else?
Cool. That's it.
All right, that's the show. If you have any questions for us or things you want to see on future episodes, please send us a DM on Instagram. You can leave us a comment. Make sure to like this video if you're watching on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, especially if like a friend sent you this episode and you want to get future episodes like this where we break down hospitality and food and chef news. We upload these episodes every week, and we're going to be doing more stuff on the clips front going forward. We also have our newsletter linked in the description, where we're also going to be including some of these articles and stories and things. Like if you prefer to read some of this stuff, or if you want to make sure you don't miss an episode, you can make sure to get subscribed in the link in the description as well. And otherwise, I'll see you folks in the next Repertoire Report.